So I've just got a few questions to ask you about sort of when you first came to university. First question, when you came here, did you feel like the university made any promises that maybe weren't fulfilled?
Um, well, I feel probably one of the things that affected me the most was one of the reasons I picked the course was to do this illustration module because I was really interested in art. None of the other universities really offered anything interdisciplinary. And then when I got to choosing my modules at the end of my first year, this was for second year, they had delisted that module and quite a few other modules as well. And I felt that I had really been cheated because it was one of the main reasons I picked this course.
So alongside that, did you come to university with any expectations where you thought this was going to happen, and maybe looking back now, years later, that was unrealistic a little bit? So do you think this is going to happen and now it probably wasn't a realistic thing?
The unrealistic expectations that I might have had were around mainly housing. That was the only thing that I probably did have an expectation of. University wasn't really something I really ever wanted to do, so I didn't really have lots of expectations around what would happen to me afterwards. But I found it quite difficult to find student housing. I didn't get a place in halls, and I think I didn't really want to go to halls, but I thought it'd be easier to get a student house in and around the campus, and it ended up that I didn't really get a really good place to stay. So I maybe thought maybe more support for students that didn't get into halls might be better for the future.
But looking back now, do you think it is realistic for every student to be able to obtain a place in halls on such a small, compact campus?
Well, looking at other universities, because my sister is now in Southampton, they have halls for all of their students, but their halls aren't on campus. They are a bus ride away or a cycle ride away, and I think that isn't. I think that's not unrealistic to expect from a city centre campus. I think it would be all right to have a few halls of residence that weren't quite in the centre of campus.
So I'm just going to ask you a few questions about your university experience. First question, when you first came to university, did you feel like the university made any promises that maybe weren't fulfilled?
Yeah, one of the biggest things I'm quite concerned with is that when I joined, I thought that because it's at a higher educational level, I would get a lot more in-depth, more constructive feedback. Whereas in reality, it was a lot more tick boxes, percentages. I could get, for example, on one essay, one percentage, and another essay, completely different one. And to me, I felt like I would have performed exactly the same with no feedback. So where would you go from that?
So I'm just going to ask you a few questions about your time at university and your experience. So firstly, when you first came to university, did you feel that the university made any promises that maybe they didn't fulfil?
Yeah, I feel that I was promised a lot more contact time than I actually have with my course, because I'm in university like less than 3 days a week, sometimes for 2 hours. This last year I had like 3 hours a week, which I just don't think's enough for my money. I mean, I'm only paying the £3,500 fees. If I was paying £9,000, it really wouldn't be enough, frankly. I'd be annoyed.
And how do you feel that has impacted on your experience here? Has it made it more positive, or do you think that you would have liked more hours?
I would have liked more contact hours, but I do think it's impacted fairly positively, as it's given me a chance to do a lot more other things with my time, sports clubs, stuff like that. So.
Okay, lovely, thank you. And alongside that, do you think you might have come to university with some quite high expectations that maybe weren't as realistic as you thought they were?
Yeah, I thought that on the social side, I thought that there'd be more big acts playing different events across the university. For example, Muse at the Summer Ball, that would have been lovely, but that didn't happen. The acts were a lot smaller than I was expecting, basically, on the social side.
And looking back now, do you think maybe that wasn't realistic to expect Muse? Are you satisfied with who has been here?
No, I wanted Muse.
Well, we'll see what we can do for the future for that. Well, thank you for coming in, Will, and have a lovely day.
I will, you too.
First question. When you first came to university, did you think they made any promises to you that they haven't fulfilled?
Yeah, like local placements have been a big problem with me actually. My first one was in Exmouth and my second one in Tiverton, so living away from Plymouth it lacks the social side and the help from the university, because especially with tutors and stuff, they come and they don't really help as much as everyone that's here. So that was a big shock for me, I think.
So do you feel like being on placement, you're almost forgotten about a little bit? You're not a student anymore, you're away and you're not as included.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely felt like there wasn't much for me going on because I'd only be here at weekends, and even then I'd be packed up with work and stuff. So it wasn't really great for me.
And how do you fund the placement, can I ask? Do you get support from the university, or what? How do you pay to get there and your accommodation? How does that all set up?
We get travel mileage given back, but we have to pay for a teaching placement. I have to pay £115 every time I go on placement, which I have to pay on top of my fees, which obviously isn't great because it's quite a lot of money. And then we have to pay, this isn't too bad, we do pay £15 a week if we're in a host family, but that includes like all meals and stuff, so that's not too bad, but that is extra cost on top of the housing that I have to pay on top of like anything else, so that's not amazing.
Guys, I just want to ask you a few questions about your induction week, because induction is a really important time for any students, whether you're young, old, you're local, you're from abroad, but it really gets you into university. So Becky, first of all, how was your induction week?
Lonely. Like, I started uni a week before everyone else, so my halls was empty and I didn't really get to know anyone other than the few people on my course, so it was a bit lonely.
And Will, how about yourself?
Mine was quite the opposite, frankly. Mine was incredible. Mine was very social, with both course friends and halls mates. When I came to uni, because I came in through clearing, it all happened very quickly, so I didn't really have a lot of time to look on online forums and stuff like that. So it was kind of thrown in at the deep end, knowing no one, and then just jumping in. But the induction side of it was great.
So first of all, when you first came here, do you think the university made any promises that they maybe haven't fulfilled? Carl, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I think in terms of approaching lecturers, they're definitely approachable, but the amount of time they're willing to give kind of varies between lecturers depending on their workload, sort of times of year. So especially having my dissertation this year, it means that it's kind of difficult. Some people get way more help than other people, and maybe the guidelines of how much help they're allowed to give you maybe it isn't there. So.
I was promised a personal tutor, and they haven't contacted me once, and because they don't teach me for anything, I don't feel like I can go up to them and kind of ask for anything, but all the other groups seem to have kind of that contact, so I'm not quite, it's left me at odds, especially for that like kind of advice with like jobs and things like that. That's what your personal tutor's for, so I've kind of missed out on that information.
Okay, thanks for that, guys. And the second question is, when you first came to uni, you were 18, I assume, 19, undergraduates just from school or from college. Did you have any expectations about university that were maybe a little bit unrealistic?
The main one that I had was with the support services that the uni provides, things like volunteering and career service and counselling and things like that. I thought they would be a lot more available to students. Obviously they are available, but I find that you have to go find out about them yourself. So, like for me, my first and most of my second year, I didn't really do any like extra stuff. But then when I found out about it, especially like the volunteering later on, it was really like beneficial for me. But I just thought it might be a little bit like more marketed to students to get them involved.
I think kind of quite closely linked to what Steve said about the student services, but specifically in terms of accommodation. Obviously when we came, I applied for halls, and it's kind of that process was fine, but then kind of after halls, you're kind of unleashed on all of the kind of landlords and that kind of thing. So there is kind of support available, but it's kind of quite hard to come by, and kind of once you're tied into a contract, and it's kind of really hard to get out of, and being quite new to obviously living independently, it's quite hard to do. So maybe kind of not so unrealistic, but kind of on such a scale. So.
And last question, if there was a student here, prospective, coming to university, what would be the one piece of advice that you give them to make sure they had an uplifting student experience?
Get involved with everything outside your course, like don't just do your course, and make sure you like use your tutors, like they are really good when you kind of like, yeah, definitely just utilize everything that's here. Yeah.
Brilliant.